Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue talking about different biomes. Today we're going to focus on biomes that are in the water, and we call these aquatic biomes. So let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're learning about today. So for aquatic biomes, there's really two major types. These two different divisions of aquatic biomes are marine. When we use that word marine, we're talking about salt water, so think like the ocean, right? The other one is called freshwater. So freshwater biomes, really the thing that's going on here is how much salt is dissolved in the water, right? If it's a lot of salt, if it's salt water, it's a marine biome. If there's no salt, we call it freshwater, okay? For the marine biome, this is a very large biome. It's the largest biome on the earth, okay? It's separated into many different ecosystems based on different biotic and abiotic factors. For the freshwater biomes, these biomes are separated into different ecosystems primarily based on abiotic factors. So those are really the two main biomes. What I wanted to do today is just take these big biomes and break them into their smaller parts. And you can think of a biome as can be broken into different ecosystems. So that's really what we'll be talking about today. Okay, so let's talk about the marine biome first. Again, the marine biome, remember that this is the biome that is salt water, right? Okay, this is the largest biome on the earth. It covers 70% of Earth's surface, okay? So it's broken into a lot of different ecosystems, okay? One of the main things about this biome is that it's very high salt content, okay? And that's going to play a really big role. Animals and organisms that live in this biome are going to have special characteristics that make living there easier. You and me and freshwater animals would not be able to live in these very well, okay? The marine biome can be subdivided into ecosystems based on depth in open ocean. So what I mean by open ocean is like way deep, far out there in the ocean, not right there where you're swimming by the shore, right? That doesn't go very deep. What I'm talking about is if you're in the middle of the ocean and the ocean goes down hundreds of meters, that's open ocean, okay? And so we can take this open ocean and divide it into different ecosystems based on its depth. And the different names, these are little nicknames for the different ecosystems. So you have something called the sunlight zone, okay? And the sunlight zone is the part of the ocean where there's a lot of sunlight coming through. That water blocks the sunlight a lot, right? You can't go very deep down and still be getting energy from the sun. It blocks a lot of that energy out. And remember that most food chains start with a producer, and producers need sunlight to make their energy. So depending on how much sunlight there is, that really dictates a lot of what the producers are doing and what the food chains look like in these areas. Okay, so the sunlight zone is basically, think of it as the ocean surface, right? That's where a lot of the sunlight's coming through. Once you move down a little bit and the sunlight is not coming through as much, we call that the twilight zone. There's a little bit of sunlight, but there's just really not that much, okay? Going down a little bit deeper, you can get to something called the midnight zone. This is where it's almost constant darkness. And because it's constant darkness, there's not going to be a lot of producers that live here that survive off of photosynthesis. They might be doing some other type of chemical reaction to make food, but they're not doing photosynthesis. And then the deepest, darkest one is called the abyssal zone. This is where it's just pitch black. This is where those animals like the anglerfish live, down deep in the dark part of the ocean where there's no sunlight. Okay, I just wanted to show you a picture of this. So again, when we talk about open ocean, we're not talking about that part right next to the shore, right? You got to get out pretty deep to the open ocean before we start breaking it into these different zones. And again, it's just based off how deep it is and how much sunlight there is. So up at the ocean surface, we call that the sunlight zone, and that's where it's photic. So that photic, think of the word photograph, right? Photo is a prefix that means light. And so where there's light, we call that the sunlight zone. You probably have a lot of producers still doing photosynthesis. But as you move down deeper into the open ocean, that sunlight's not coming through as much. It's darker. We would call that aphotic, so without light. And when you don't have light, you're not going to have producers doing photosynthesis anymore. And so that's really going to change what the food web looks like and what the different organisms in this area look like. Okay? Great. So that's one way to define the marine ecosystem or the marine biome. Another way to define or to break apart the marine biome, within the marine biome are several different ecosystems, and I just kind of wanted to show you some of these different ones. So this is mostly based off the vegetation or the animal life that's in this area, and they can really change what type of organisms we have there. So we can have a coral reef as its own ecosystem, a kelp forest as its own ecosystem, an estuary as its own ecosystem, intertidal zone. An intertidal zone is, think about when you're at the beach, you know how the waves come in and then the waves go out, and sometimes it's the tide is higher than others. That would be called the intertidal zone. So it's where the tides are coming in and where they're not. You can have just the open ocean surface, okay? You can have these things called mangroves. I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. Seagrass meadows, lagoons, and a salt marsh. And so I just wanted to show you a couple of different pictures of those and talk about them in a little bit more detail. Okay, so look in that top left corner. That's a coral reef. Think of Finding Nemo if you've ever seen that. There's a lot of different fish here. They kind of live within the coral reef and among it and around it, living near those sea anemones, right? Okay, if you go down from that bottom left picture, that is the seagrass floor. You can see that there's a lot of grass coming out of that, and you can imagine how there's a lot of crabs and starfish kind of moving around throughout that little seagrass area. Bottom right corner is a kelp forest, and so you can see this kelp is growing really densely. It almost looks like a real forest on a terrestrial biome, but instead it's all underwater. But the type of animals that live there is going to be different than the type of organisms that live in open ocean, right? And then the top right corner, that is a mangrove. Mangrove, these are trees that have these large root systems, and it really forms its own ecosystem where it's really wet, but the roots are holding onto the soil really well. So that's its own ecosystem as well. Okay, so those are all marine ecosystems. There are a lot of different marine ecosystems. The main thing you want to remember is that it's all salt water, right? And so that really is going to determine what type of organisms that we have here. And the type of organisms that live in the coral reef is going to be different than the type of animals that live in the kelp forest. That's just depending on what type of adaptations the organisms have to make living in those places better, right? So those are all our marine ecosystems. I got one more picture I'll show you. So this is that estuary. What is an estuary? An estuary is where fresh water meets salt water, and you'll get something called brackish water. So if you look way to the far right over there, that's the ocean, right? That's the beach, and you can see the ocean coming in. So that water on the far, far right, that's salt water. But on the left where the cows are drinking that water, so that's fresh water. And where they mix is called an estuary, and that's its own ecosystem as well, because some organisms just like living there a little bit better. When you get salt water and fresh water together, it's called brackish water, and it's not as salty as salt water, but it's not fresh like fresh water. So, okay, let's go on to freshwater ecosystems, okay? So the freshwater biome can be divided into different ecosystems primarily based on how fast the water is moving. So the ponds and lakes, the water in ponds and lakes does not move very fast, right? That's very slow moving water. And so the term for that is lentic, okay? Where the water's moving a little bit faster, because the water's moving faster, you're going to have different organisms that live there. Examples of this would be like rivers and streams, and we would call that lotic, okay? And then the last type of freshwater ecosystem are swamps, bogs, and peats. This is areas of land that are heavily saturated, so it's land, but there's a lot of fresh water there, and we call those wetlands. And examples of wetlands are swamps, bogs, and peats. Okay, so here's some different pictures of those. In the top right corner, we have a river, so we can kind of see how that water's moving, right? Bottom left picture, that's a large lake, so that water is probably not moving very much at all, and the water that's there tends to stay there for a long time. Bottom right picture, that would either be a swamp or a bog, where it's land, but it's very, very saturated, and again, that's its own ecosystem. So those are all the different aquatic biomes and the ecosystems that go along with them. Your teacher has some other work for you to do today, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.